So, hello and welcome to our second virtual town hall hosted by the Utah Tax Reform Alliance of Citizens. This organization was previously known as the 2019 Tax Referendum Group. We are hoping to expand the reach of both constituents and legislators by providing additional formats for legislators to educate and update those they represent, as well as allow those being represented or affected by actions of legislators to provide feedback to legislators in a real-time setting. Representative Candice, and your last name, Pierucci? How do you pronounce it?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, perfect, is our guest today. Representative Pierucci replaced Representative John Notwell after he stepped down just last year. And fun trivia fact, she beat me in that race, and I'm glad she did. She represents House District 52, which covers Harriman, and I think it also covers a couple of slices of Riverton and South Jordan.
So we cover a portion of Riverton and then a sliver of Daybreak in South Jordan.
Yeah. And Representative Pierucci will begin by providing us an update, and that update can consist of whatever she chooses, what's happening, what she feels is important. And then following her update, we'll have an opportunity to submit questions via the Q&A panel. If the question leads to a discussion, we will unmute you so you can interact with Representative Pierucci in real time. Please remember to be respectful. We know these discussions can get emotional sometimes. As hosts and moderators, we will do our best to keep this event positive, constructive, and productive. And having said that, if there are no questions, we're going to go ahead and turn time over to you, Representative Pierucci. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, George. I appreciate you setting this up. I think this is a great format to let people participate in the process without having to drive somewhere, right? And just hop on at home. So thank you. So for me, I grew up in Harriman, and I went to middle school, high school at Riverton High. I got my undergrad in political science. I have a master's in public administration. I worked for a congressman's store, and I worked for a nonprofit conservative policy think tank, Sutherland Institute, prior to this, which I actually had quit before when I was elected. So I'm doing this full time right now. And I feel really grateful. And George, you've been a fantastic resource and someone to work with. So for me, I wanted to give an update on what I'm working on legislatively. So right now, I've actually already got 2 bills passed through the House floor. And but one was for the Heritage and Arts, the other was for the Department of Workforce Services, and really actually looking at fraudulent activity with our childcare providers and some of the issues they'd had there. So increase the civil penalty on that, and also just streamline some of the services. But the bills that I've been working on and I've prioritized right now, obviously, as you guys are aware, Olympia Hills is, I was at the public hearing, and I'm guessing many of you were, and listening to the county, the application by the developer. And to me, it is so incredibly concerning that a county, a first-class county like Salt Lake County, that is over 90% incorporated, can throw in these developments that are beyond the regional plan that they set up as a county, that cities have zoned according to, and that they can then throw in these islands of developments that have massive repercussions. So a concern I have with that is, and I've been working really closely with Harriman City, Riverton City, and even South Jordan on this, just discussing what kind of impacts it's going to have. So Harriman PD is going to have to expand dramatically. It's going to have serious impacts on our roads and congestion. Schools obviously will be impacted by this, and so on. And there's no way to capture, obviously, those individuals who will be living there will not be paying taxes to cities like we do, say, as Riverton or Harriman residents. And so, and the developer in doing this is actually avoiding $40 million in impact fees. So it's a pretty significant amount. And so my piece of legislation that's currently still in the drafting process, essentially, though, is saying that, look, if you are going to do this and it's going to be above your regional plan, you have to allow county, you go through your process, but then you have to allow cities that are immediately adjacent to this development to collect an impact fee. because the developer is avoiding it right now. Another part of this conversation, while we're drafting it, has come down to, should you also then require that those developments be annexed? That the county shouldn't be in the business of providing municipal services in an area like ours, where over 90% of Salt Lake County is incorporated. Of course, rural counties are different, where they're over 2/3 unincorporated, but it's a little bit different out here on the Wasatch Front. And in looking at this development, we're essentially popping in one of the largest developments in the nation in the corner of the cul-de-sac, you could say, of the Wasatch Front, right? And the infrastructure is just not here for it. So that's what that bill would achieve. Frankly, that is something that I've been having meetings with stakeholders about, and it's going to be an uphill battle, but one that I'm willing to do. I think this is huge for our community. So the other piece of legislation that I'm working on right now is with the state auditor, and basically it's streamlining GRAMA, so government records requests, and how they're facilitated and who houses them on websites. This is largely a cleanup bill, but last year legislation was run and it's been a nightmare for those agencies. So working on that. And then I've been asked by the State Board of Education. Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of the legislation we have to run is for those few bad actors, right? But this one is an unfortunate situation where currently it is against, it's illegal, right, for a teacher to have sexual relations with a student who is 18 at her school, he or she's school. There's a loophole in that though, and there was a specific case where this teacher had engaged with a student who was 18, who was in her district, and had sexual relations, and they weren't able to charge her to the full extent because, and my understanding is she's still working with the school, because technically he was 18 and technically it wasn't in her school, but it was in her district and she was advising him. And so there still is that the disproportionate of power, right, in her having authority over that. So it would expand it to where a teacher cannot engage in sexual relations with students within their district. And it's really unfortunate we have to run legislation like this. The other one, I actually have been working with a constituent, Harriman, who had a terrible experience. And truly, and it's related to the stalking revisions that we have. And if you look at that language, it's pretty broad. And so I'm working with the Salt Lake County Prosecutor's Office, and then the defenders on getting some language that's more middle ground on this. And then additionally, it's really odd, but right now when a restraining order is in place, if let's say it's a ex-husband who gets a call from his ex-wife who says, I need you to come over. I have to go to work. The babysitter can't make it. I need you to come watch the kids. And so there's a restraining order in place, but in this case, an example, the ex-husband will come, and it's a setup. And so his ex-wife will call the police and say he's here, and then it cuts off all visitation for the dad. Anyway, so this would essentially allow that attorney to communicate with each other. Currently, if that dad were to call his attorney and that attorney calls the ex-wife's attorney, you're in violation of that restraining order. And it makes it really sticky and really hard for people. So it's a technical bill, but it's one that's important, and it's impacted one of my constituents that I'm working on. So those are the things I'm working on. Beyond legislation, I'll say that mental health has been a huge discussion up at the Hill. Obviously, we know in Harriman, we've had the suicide clusters, and we've been working as a community to address that. I was on the Riverton Hope Squad in high school, actually, and just did the Riverton Hope Walk. And so that's something that I really am passionate about it, and following closely on what we do. And you'll see we've got several bills up that I'm happy to answer questions about, but that's a little bit of an overview of what I'm working on. I sit and serve on the Higher Education Appropriations Committee, so specifically dealing with higher ed funding. and then government operations, the House Gov Ops Committee, and then the Health and Human Services Committee, which we've had a full docket thus far for. And so if you've been following in the news, there's a bill by Representative Thurston that actually makes it to where, with the cost of insulin being so outrageous and people after insurance paying anywhere from $500 to $2,000 a month, this bill's trying to get that under control, while still allowing and encouraging competition in that market. And then we've also had a bill, I don't know if you had followed Representative Patrice Arendt's legislation, but it was a newborn safe haven bill that she had ran 17 years ago that we were updating. And it was really cool because one of the babies who had been saved by that, so this child's mom had dropped him off in the hospital safe haven drop box, essentially. He was there to testify in favor of it, that it had saved his life. So we've been busy up there. We're working through some things, obviously, with the tax reform special session. You know, I feel like we're playing a little bit of catch up, but also that's me being a freshman. But yeah, it's been a good experience so far, and I'm excited to answer any questions you have.
Thanks so much. And so if any of you out there have questions, you can put them in the Q&A panel, and like I said earlier, I will help to convey those questions or unmute you and allow you to communicate directly with her. And while we wait on those questions or comments, I have a question because, first of all, I don't know how many on here know, but Candice did vote against SB 2001, and she was an early supporter of the repeal, and we appreciate that. Marcy, hands up. Yeah, woot woot. I saw that. Thank you. And so we appreciate her. It's really difficult to do, especially as a freshman, and the pressures you probably were under at the time. So, and then so Daryl, before I ask my own, I like to represent others. So Daryl Robinson, who you might know him already.
Daryl, yes, I owe you an email.
Yes. And so he has a question asking, I would like to know if she is willing to push for a committee to review using impact fees to build schools.
Yeah, so this is actually something, and Daryl, I apologize. I've been trying to get back with everyone within 24 hours, and just when I think I'm there, lately I've been hitting about 100 emails a day. So I'm just trying to keep through those with all the meetings. But this is a discussion I know, and I think there was recently an op-ed about this. And it's something that, thank you, Daryl. I appreciate this feedback that you understand. So in terms of using impact fees to build schools, I think my understanding is this would be beyond a city impact fee, correct? That you would want, in addition to municipalities collecting impact fees, you would want the district to collect an impact fee. Is that correct?
I'm going to mute him so he can respond to you. Just a second.
Okay.
Yeah, there you are. All right, Daryl, you can speak. Go ahead. You're unmuted. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm collecting them for the district, and that's how most states fund building new schools. I don't know if you saw my piece that I put. We actually did research on it in about the mid 1990s. The legislators put it to a committee to look at it, and it never went to a committee, and it was never looked at it. They put a moratorium on it, and then they said we're going to study it for a year, and we never studied it. It was just their tricky way. And so if you go on my Facebook, you'll see the link to the legislative comments and what they were trying to accomplish with it. But they froze them and kind of killed it, and then said we'll study it, and then they never studied it. And it's killing our district. We're being taxed in the Jordan School District $40 million extra a year at least in just building schools. How fast we're growing. And we're passing that on to all the residents. And I don't think it needs to be 100%. Like, New Home shouldn't fund everything. Yeah. But it is infrastructure. It's just like a utility or water. We need them in order to build new communities. So why can we? And the funny thing is, we're charged impact fees. So we were charged $2 million from Bluffdale to build 2 schools, and $700,000 from Harriman. And so we get charged impact fees, but we can't charge impact fees do what
as
cities
well.
are,
Yes.
cities are causing this by approving these buildings, and
Yeah.
we have no recourse.
Yeah, no, that's a
Yeah.
really good point, and fair too to point out that a district has no input in the conversation, right, regarding zoning and the application process of developers. You're just stuck with whatever the shakeout is, and in the case of Olympia Hills, it's going to be a pretty dramatic change. Do you know? I'd love to connect offline too. I'd like to know which committee that went to. I'm guessing it should have gone to probably public education appropriations, and just to see why that study died. I have heard that though, where occasionally I'll put a moratorium on something, and I think it's worth looking at. I think right now we're having to grapple with as a state, and particularly our region of the state, the impacts of growth and I feel like a lot of developers are more than happy to jump in, right, and throw in uh, particularly in our area, high density housing. Harriman's up to over 40% at this point, so we're pulling our weight. um, but yeah, no, Daryl, that's a really fair question, and one that I'd like to see where that study went, and I'm happy to follow up with. I know one of the senators in our area sits on that appropriations committee, and I'd like to see where the study went, because obviously this was in the 90s. That's crazy. But just kind of tracking that history and seeing if that's something we could look towards to do an analysis on that, what that would look like.
Yeah, just an analysis would be great to me. Like,
Yeah.
if it comes back that this is not good for the whole, I mean, I'm looking for schools. I'm looking out for our schools, so obviously I want it, right?
Yeah.
But you're in charge of looking for the whole community, and so if it's reviewed and we thoroughly think that we're doing the right thing, then let's keep them. But as far as we can find, and I've had people looking for it, we can't see the study was ever done.
Okay.
So,
Well,
and you can find that link that it'll go right to the legislator comments in the 1990s. If you look on my site, or I can email it to you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll go back and check it out. Thank you so much, Daryl.
Thank you. You're awesome. Thank you.
All right. Here's another question from Lindsay Hill. She says, you mentioned your concerns about Salt Lake City taking actions working outside of their jurisdiction. Do you have similar concerns about the state taking over the inland port, essentially telling the city and the county what its zoning will be?
Lindsay, that's a fair question. So I was, and if I misspoke, I apologize. I was talking about Salt Lake County, rather than the city of Salt Lake. And the inland port, I think, is a tricky situation because it's an incredible opportunity for us as a state. So to me, I think, though, there's a way for all the stakeholders to come to a table on this one. And I think we'll see. We do have a new mayor of Salt Lake, right? And as we kind of go back to the drawing board on this and work with her, I'm hopeful that it'll be more of a team effort on this. And I do think there was a lot of misinformation about the inland port. But I think that the economic opportunities are fantastic for our state. And if we can find a way to make it something that Salt Lake City sees as valuable, that's worthwhile. Obviously, I am a proponent of local control, and I recognize, though, that Salt Lake City has some concerns, and to respond to that, they are conducting and have been conducting an environmental study, which was one of the key concerns. And so I think that moving forward, though, we'll be working more in tandem with the city.
So if you have a follow-up for that one, Lindsay. When did you have something? Saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I have a question. I've been following a bunch of incentive bills designed to either bring big business into the state or to bolster big business in the state.
Yeah.
And I have two questions about it. The first one is
related to the film one.
The film is one of them. The other is one that that Senator Winterton is running, which is building big gas and electric infrastructure. And it's an ongoing $35 million appropriation out of the general fund, ongoing for at least 4 years. It looks like it's ongoing forever. And
there's no sunset provision.
Yes, and so I'll send you the bill numbers. But so the first thing is, if we were going to be doing grocery taxes, um, to the tune of $200 million per year, right? Why would we be able to afford these multiple bills that are millions of dollars of incentives for big business? That's the number one question I have. And then the second one is, as I'm talking to these legislators, they are all turning to roll these over into education appropriations instead of general fund appropriations, which concerns me because I know we had a little more money in the education fund, in the general fund, but I don't want to make it a habit to take money away from our kids. So those are sort of two related questions.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think it when you look at specific to those incentives, and I'd love to see the bill number. That one hasn't come to the floor yet, but I have been aware of those conversations. And for example, there's another. I'm just throwing. So there's another bill that GOED is working on that essentially, if you're going to provide that if they're going to be providing an incentive to an organization, then they should give preference to companies who also are willing to provide or at some level support for childcare in the state, because we have a huge lack of that. So for me, I am a free market conservative, and so I can see the concern of if we're pushing and pulling, right? And in regards to the Winterton's bill in general, I'd have to look at it if it's saying that they need to. I think the idea behind a tax incentive, obviously, is that we're investing this money now, hoping that it'll come back tenfold, right? And the film industry is unique. I know that Utah, we're very conservative in our approach on this, but other states like Georgia and New Mexico and Colorado, I mean, they throw everything in. They roll it all out, roll out the red carpet for these the film industry so that they can come in the state. And so I know there's concern that if we don't provide any tax incentive, then we'll be left out of that. I know the senator who's running that, particularly in his district. I don't know how many of you have kids who watch Andy Mack on the Disney Channel,
Yes.
but that's actually filmed in the Manitowoc area. And so, I've worked with the Utah Film and Tourism Office, and anyways, just talking about this, I think there is a balance to be struck. But to your point, I think we have to look at what that fiscal note is on it. And to your concern, if we were raising grocery taxes but have the funding for this, I think that is concerning. So I'm happy to follow up on the bill that Senator Winterton is working on. It sounds like it's in the Senate right now. And I can get back to you if you want to provide your email.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. I've got your email. I can send it directly to you. And it's not so much that I'm against corporate incentives forever, but I think that first, if we've got a budget imbalance, we should first balance it before we're ready to be going out and balancing it on the backs of the taxpayers, right? And maybe roll back our corporate incentives for a few years. And once then we can start rolling out those corporate incentives again, because I have no problem bringing big business back into the state, right? But first we have to take grocery taxes and gas taxes and things off the table, get our small businesses back up and steady, and have this nice balanced economy. And then we can start working on big businesses again, because our unemployment is so low we can't even hire workers, right? We need a good solid economy, and we want small businesses stable and to be, recession proof, right? Like we were, and we've got tons of really solid big business right now. And so let's get back to that balance. We don't need to be bringing a ton of big business in right now. We're doing really well on that front. And then once we get the budget balanced, then we can start talking about it again. And no offense to Senator Thatcher, he's explained his whole that exact story you told me. He's explained that to me too. Yeah. I love that show. I love, I literally love the same shows he does. But Utah we have our red rock country, right? We have our amazing canyons. There are people who are going to come here to film because of those things, regardless of the incentives we offer them. So Utah already has its attributes that will bring the film industry here. We can wait a year or two on the incentives until we've got our budget in order. That's my opinion.
Well, and I can, like I said, I'd love to follow up with you on, I know that the film and space, it's a really long acronym. There are so many acronyms in government, but essentially they operate with the tourism industry up by the Capitol. And they have some data actually on the revenue that's brought into the state that I'd love to look at as well. But I think what you're hitting on too with small businesses, one of the arguments I have heard against some of these incentives is that we're hurting local business because they are not able to compete with the same level. They're not getting those tax incentives. And then you're providing it to a company who truly could already relocate here if they wanted, because of our fantastic environment. And so I think it more than just the actual fiscal note of one of those things, you have to look at the consequences for local business. And that's something I've heard with the tech sector specifically, that we have to be careful with. Those local companies are filling it.
Oh, I'm so glad you're thinking about all this. This is good. This is such a good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you both. And I want to go on record and saying I am support wherever not helping big business with taxpayer funds, right, as a principle. But I do have, there's another question from Marcy, but I want to go back to your original comment about the idea behind the impact fees for Olympus Hill. I agree with you, and that's one of the primary reasons why I have concerns about subsidizing these big businesses, because I love having them here too, but they need to be able to carry their own weight and not be here on the again on the backs and shoulders of other taxpayers, right? And so when Adobe, I don't know specifically if Adobe's getting incentives or not, but it's a huge, right? They're a huge impact at the point of the mountain. And if they're being subsidized, which who knows, because GoEd stuff is all, seems like it's all secret and nobody knows what is really happening. And I might be wrong there, but that's what it seems like to me. Then, and everybody else is footing the bill for building that infrastructure to help them build out. But
I think too, to your point, one thing that we are experiencing, right, is extreme growth here, and part of that is Silicon Slopes, right? That we've brought that now they're having to literally, because we have such a tight market right now. I think our unemployment's 2.4%. I mean, we're trying to get people to work who don't want to work, right? Like but that to the point where we have to be creative, and these companies are having to relocate people to bring them in for the workforce. And then you need the infrastructure to support that. One of my concerns with Olympia Hills is the promise that, well, they're going to live, work, and play there. And we've talked about this, but unless you're going to mandate that someone cannot leave that, planned community, that's a really hard promise to make. And you would then have to require that you would have to work there. And I think one of the concerns, so Y2 Analytics, in partnership with the League of Cities and Towns, did a study that the two big reasons people are skeptical and the biggest ways of harming public trust is first, promising affordable housing and then not delivering on it, which we're seeing. And then the second is the lack of infrastructure and broken promises by developers. And I think in Harriman, Harriman Town Center was supposed to be a place people could live, work, and play. And if you've been there, I mean, most people now go to Mountain View Village. So anyways, I think we have to be really critical when we're reviewing those things. As far as GoEd goes, because they're government entity, I'll have to look into the process. Obviously, with the applications, I know there's some level of confidentiality, but I think that's something I should be able to figure out in terms of who's receiving what, or at least have a conversation with them. Their leadership team's pretty great to work with. So,
yeah, I mean the one thing there, remember when there was the deal with Amazon, it was all secret, right? I don't know if anyone still knows exactly what Amazon's getting out of taxing us.
That reminds me, there's a bill that's not numbered yet. Representative Spendlove is running it. He thinks it's going to be numbered sometime this week, but it is going to require all of the tax incentives to be tracked. And if there is any other bill more important to support this year, I can't think of it. I mean, some of the ones you mentioned earlier, I love, but tracking those tax incentives that we give out to big businesses, I think is a critical bill to be tracking, because all of these years we've been giving those tax incentives and they literally get lost unless you go searching previous years for big fiscal notes. So I hope you'll keep an eye out for that one.
Yeah, you bet. Representative Spendlove is fantastic. He's been a brilliant legislator to work with. So I'll follow up with him. I feel like he's a good friend, and I would support that. I think that's when we're dealing with taxpayer dollars, I think transparency is important.
So Marcy's had a question. It's a little bit more open-ended. She's asked, she would like to know hear your ideas about managing growth, especially with roads and air quality.
You bet. So I think there are a few things we have to work on. And honestly, since being elected, I have really tried to jump in head first in terms of looking at transportation and how it's funded in our area. And so I may get super policy wonk nerdy on you. So if I need to get out of the weeds, let me know. But some things that I think we can work on particularly. So right now, well, first, let me address the structural issue that was the bill I voted no on, but the tax reform was hoping to address. But essentially right now, we in our general fund do not have the funds necessary to appropriate, I think, what we need to be investing in transportation. And so that's something we're going to have to deal with. But what I've learned more and more is the challenges and red tape that comes with it. So if you're in this area, you're familiar with the fact that Harriman and Riverton have preserved corridor to allow light rail to come through to connect from Daybreak and keep going on down to the Silicon Slopes area. Right now, though, that money is tied to federal dollars. And so to do that, you have to demonstrate a certain amount of ridership to be able to use that. As much as I would love to see light rail come through, and it is a project, the Wasatch Front Regional Council has looked at that, and they're currently doing a transit analysis study to see if it should come through the east side or west side. And I sincerely am hoping it is the west side, just with our growth here. But there are other options that have been discussed, and I've actually met with UTA's commissioner that works with us about this. And so I don't know if you've heard, they're doing a rollout in our area, but it's UTA microtransit, if you're familiar with it. But it's essentially UTA doing Uber for a much more local group. And my understanding, and after discussing this with UTA, is the preliminary studies have shown incredible promise and that people are utilizing it. They need to work on getting the word out to people, but that's something that can be more effective. And additionally, those microtransit numbers can help us demonstrate the demand in our area, right, for additional alternatives. And I don't know if you've been down to Provo recently, but they've put in a BRT, the massive bus route system that they have down there. That's something that UTA has looked at Harriman and said this could potentially work here as well if there's the ridership and interest in it. And so Wasatch Front Regional Council has put out, their 10-year report, 25-year report, and their 50-year report. And those, from there, the legislature, they advise on what projects, and then it goes to the Transportation Committee and leadership to look at. But I think for our area, and especially because of all of the high density that's a part of that growth, I think there will be more interest for people who want to take light rail in our area, and we've preserved corridor for it, but it's just demonstrating and having funding for it, because right now we can't demonstrate that ridership on it. But I do think that's something we have to look at. I also think, if you look at that report, it looks at the different roads. We need another east-west connector out here. I mean, we needed one 5 years ago. We need one now. I actually live right off of 134th, so I get to experience that wonderful drive home every day. I've been able to get through several audiobooks while working at the Capitol. But I say that in jest, there's only so we need to expand our roads, and I completely support that. We also, though, it has to be a hybrid approach because there's only so many homes and buildings and things you can blow out to keep expanding your roads. And so I think we have to be really smart and responsible about that. And that's why I'm really excited to see and hoping that this transit analysis study that's being conducted, that will largely determine kind of the route of that light rail, what that will look like. And so yeah, I hope that helps answer your question. It's something that I'm studying and looking into closely. I have a lot of interest in being on the transportation committee at some point. Most people do, though. But yeah, so that's something I'm working on. And so Representative Schultz, as in leadership, he is does a lot with transportation, and there are several others who are on the committee that that I've been able to connect with, and really just keeping that we have to work in tandem. The cities have to be able to work with the state on this, and so I've really tried to keep a close tab on how Riverton, South Jordan, and Harriman feels about this.
Sure. And if there's a follow-up, feel free to ask it. Now, David Campbell had a question that's relevant to what you were just talking about. And I'm going to make a comment, something that came up during Senator Anurag's session as well, before I let you answer this question. So David's question is there effort to make UTA self-sufficient, or will we continue to fund them indefinitely without accountability? And I want to point out there's a bill that Senator Anurag was running that is supposed to help. I'm not saying I endorse it or not endorse it, just pointing it out as it's relevant, that it's supposed to help to create a master plan for transportation, because he says that there's some feedback he's gotten that what we're doing and the cost that we're incurring to do it is really apparently a lot higher than it should be for what we've been able to do with the money that we've spent. So anyway, go ahead and give us your thoughts on that.
It is, so in my undergrad and even in my master's program, we always talked about it as a bad example. And right now, there's hesitancy. So it's like a quasi-government entity, right? But if we were to completely accept responsibility and take them on as an entity, it could impact our AAA credit rating because of that they are in. And so
that's how bad they are.
That's kind of what's playing into this a little bit, right? But I mean, you hear outrageous numbers where a person pays like $2.50 to get to the airport, but it actually is costing UTA $33 to get them there. And so I absolutely am in favor of finding a way to have it be efficient and sufficient. And I think it's going to take a bit of time. Last year, they did some serious restructuring of the UTA. As many people know, it had garnered quite a reputation and it wasn't a positive one, but they've really tried to restructure things and putting in these new commissioners. And I have seen a huge shift in their responsiveness and working with the cities and, like I said, Wasatch Front Regional Council. But yeah, I definitely think that's something we have to do and we have to work towards it because they're a part of this transportation solution, and it won't work if they're always in the hole and we're not willing to completely accept them because they're just in so much debt.
Okay. And so I'm going to get to your question in a moment. On the same topic, you mentioned something about like an Uber Lite. Do you know, I mean, UTA is building that themselves, or is there not a way to take advantage of those companies that already do that, and instead of building their own?
So yeah, right now they're using their UTA vehicles that are basically doing a localized microtransit, but you could argue that we could be partnering with Uber and Lyft on that, and I actually haven't heard that. I could follow up with them to see if that's something that's been entertained. It is a little different because it limits on the radius that you can go. It's mostly for getting you to and from like a bus stop or a track stop. But that's something I can follow up with them on.
Okay, and so I don't know. Daryl Robinson had a question about HB 250 school fees bill. Is that something you're familiar with?
Who's running that, Daryl?
I need to unmute him.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Pull it up real
You're
quick.
unmuted again. Hopefully you're ready, please.
Steve Handy.
Okay.
He's running it.
Well, it's Elizabeth Henderson.
Oh, okay. It hasn't come before my committee, and
Okay.
so the first bills I vet are in my committee level, but I can pull it up really quick and take a look at it. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I was just wondering what they're trying to do with it. And I know we've been talking about school fees for a lot. It was brought to my attention that it's even out there yesterday, and I knew something was going to run. I just didn't know what they're trying to do with it. So it's no big deal. I can check through our legislative
So I just pulled up
division.
250, and that must be, is it Senate Bill 250 or House Bill? Because House Bill 250 is
It
this.
says House Bill 250.
Okay, it might be something else. House Bill 250 is a state flag.
Maybe it was last year. You know what? It says 2019. Did they run a bill last year that didn't make it? It should say 220, right?
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, it would say 2020 if it was this year. The 250 is actually a bill on flags for Steve Handy.
Well, someone just brought this to my
have a
attention.
whole
I
other
knew that
conversation
something was going to be coming up. So, well, that's good to know. That was my bad.
I
Sorry.
can follow up. No, I'm friends with Representative Lisenby and Senator Henderson. And I can follow up. It's possible if a bill doesn't make it, it's not uncommon to have it come back the next
Come back
session,
again.
right? Yeah, so I can follow up with
And they've been looking at the high cost of like these school trips, like choir and some of those things, and they were thinking of trying to make those waivable. So the problem with making them waivable is, we have some schools that a third of the school are eligible to have fees waived, and you have a $2,000 trip being waived. Who pays for that?
Yeah.
I think it would be the end of trips if that was to pass.
I know they did last year work on dealing with fees, right, for like football and cheerleading and extracurricular activities, but I can follow up with them on that and get back to you.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I guess that someone had just forwarded it to me last night and I wasn't aware, and so I should look at a year. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Daryl. Some of us have unlimited amounts of questions, and I'm on that list. So if there's any questions, anybody out there who's waiting to ask, this is a good time to put in the Q&A. Otherwise,
one thing I wanted to bring up, George, if while
ahead.
people are thinking on questions, is something that you're going to hear that we're working a lot on this legislative session is on vaping. And so I was blown away. So I did a ride along with Harriman PD, and Harriman High is really leading out on this. Their vice principal, Hudnall, is doing presentations all over the state on the issues that they're having with this. But what was so surprising to me was the fact that the officers shared that the majority of students get their vaping devices, the vials, the pop-ins from their parents. And that when they call the parents and say, do you know your 14, 15-year-old, we caught him vaping in the bathroom. They said, oh yeah, I just bought him that yesterday. It's bubblegum flavor. It's harmless. And it's mind-boggling to me that we've somehow disconnected the two. And so that's something we're going to be looking at addressing, because right now 12.4% of Utah's youth actively vape. And it has serious consequences. And what we're seeing too is, students are selling them at the schools, and they'll have THC in it, or much harder hallucinogenic drugs. And anyways, so that's something I think we need to be aware of in our area, and just as a community, the education awareness around that we need to have. The fact that Harriman PD is having to explain to parents what it is a problem.
Yeah, thanks for that. And if it was my personal call, I'd have a follow-up for you. But there's a question from Carol, and her question is, for the past 2 years, the state has had a significant surplus. I think she means in the public education bucket. Why isn't the legislature returning that surplus to taxpayers?
So right now that would be out of the
earmarked funds.
The earmarked funds, yes, thank you. So that comes from income tax. So and I've heard people say, the child tax credit, that would be huge for our area. And I think again, you saw in the tax reform, part of the switcheroo, right, was adding an income tax credit there. But that's something I can follow up with leadership on. I am obviously in favor of giving people a tax cut. I think there's a balance too, though, and just so you know, what we hear as a legislature, there are a lot of advocates and proponents who say that money should just be kept for education, rather than providing tax credits, excuse me, a tax cut back to the people. And right now we're looking at, and this was in a public, it was in an open caucus meeting. So, but we're 20 million short essentially in the general fund. And so we're really working on, making sure the programs we're looking at are efficient and finding ways to cut. But I think you see there's this balance. And so, and I'm just saying from a legislative perspective, if you were to give this massive tax cut back, right, there would be huge pushback from individuals saying, well, that should have gone to education. And people always, cite where the lowest per pupil or in the bottom half. We also have a ton of kids in Utah. There are lots of things that go into that weighted metric. Even if we were to spend the entire state budget on that, we would only bump up to 25th in the nation, just to put into perspective. But I think that's a fair question to ask.
Yeah. And, one thought that I've had is if we want to increase education, money in the education bucket, we should do it intentionally, right? What happened here was it was just a change in the federal law that affected how income worked in the state law. So,
and so 100% in favor of us running a bill for a child tax credit, because so the average age in Harriman and Riverton is 26. We have a lot of young families who were hurt when, like you said, that federal change happened, and Idaho immediately accounted for it, but Utah, we haven't, and it's still impacting people.
All right, great. And so there, let me see if there's anything else pending. So one question that came up in my mind when you were talking about you said there was a flag law. Have you seen? I'm sure you've seen. I think is it McKay who's running that? Somebody's running that bill on trying to redo the flag, the state flag.
Yeah. So that. Yeah, there's been discussions about redoing the state flag. There's been discussions on a commemorative state flag for our anniversary. My thought is this: if it isn't broken, don't fix it. I actually like our state flag. I know people think otherwise, stylistically, they're not a fan of it. I think there's a lot that we need to actually address this session. And so I would hope we're prioritizing the weightier matters. But yeah, there it is in the works. And Senator McKay is a friend. I'm happy to follow up with him on it. I know the redesign, though, people have been talking about for a while. I'd be interested. How do you guys feel about that?
I'd like to hear the others too. But one thing I want to say, he has been engaging pretty well in social media, right, with the public. And one thing that I hear a lot of is like, maybe it's a good thing to do, but we have more important things to do, right? So they're kind of a good, better, best. And Wendy, maybe you've got a comment on this one as well. I see the movement happening over there. Or maybe you're unmuted though. Should I unmute you? I just unmuted you, Wendy. Sorry.
No, of all the things we should be spending time and money on, the flag is probably not my favorite.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And
even if there's zero income, yeah, even if we disagree with the flag, and even if there's zero financial impact, because we're going to replace the flag over time, naturally when they're weathered and tethered or whatever. But the thing is, still, we're wasting time. We have like hundreds of bills that have relevance, and so in that way, I think that we're wasting precious time, even if we're not wasting taxpayer dollars to do it, right? So that's the key.
Yeah, and I agree on that. And I think too, you'll see. And what I found, we have a lot of resolutions. Some are fantastic. It's not to say that they're not all awesome, but I know some legislators who will just vote no because they think this is not what we should be prioritizing our time on. And we really do. It is drinking through a fire hose, hauling through those 45 days. I noticed that someone wanted to go back and talk about vaping. And
that was me again.
Okay, so you said February 18th, there's a parent meeting?
So that mentioned the February 18th meeting.
Okay.
And then Wendy must have another question about vaping.
Yeah, Daryl and I are on the same page an awful lot of the time, so that's pretty funny. So I am in favor of some of the new regulations that are coming out on vaping because child safety is important to me.
Yeah.
But this is actually a sister issue. We've had 47 deaths related to vaping in the United States this year. I don't know if you know this or not. About 10,000 teenagers die from caffeine-related deaths, mostly from energy drinks, from drinking, slamming like 3 energy drinks a year, or like all at once.
It kills your liver.
Yeah, and it gives them heart attacks is the other thing. I had no idea. I am a Democrat who doesn't believe we should. I don't know if you knew that. I don't sound like a Democrat on tax calls. Um, but my son went to the ER from drinking a single energy drink too fast. He's a little tiny kid. And I had no idea until that happened that it was even dangerous because there's no information out there. There's no education, anything like that. So if we're going to be addressing public health crises on things related to kids, I just wanted to make sure that maybe those were addressed in tandem. That's all.
I appreciate that. And again, I would say a lot of my colleagues are drinking those energy drinks. I usually stick with the Coke. But I would love to, if you can send me that study over, or I can look at it as well. I'd be curious how those are. That would be a federal regulation, right, that they're having to meet. But I'd be open to looking at that and just seeing what kind of warning labels and issues there might be with that.
There are warning labels on them, and they get around it by selling certain energy drinks, which they market with cotton candy flavors and things like that. But then they have a sign at the top of the display that says these are available to 21 and older.
Interesting.
But they still sell them in corner stores and stuff like that. I had no idea till my kid almost, he had like, I'll follow up afterwards, but
Yeah,
I had no idea how dangerous they were until my kid went to the ER and then I started studying it. So
yeah, that's terrifying. Yeah, if you'll send me that, and I'd love to chat with you offline. I represent all of District 52. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. So
I'm just on the other side. I'm in 41, but I followed you since you got elected, and I'm just a few blocks away, and so
yeah,
I think you're
don't
awesome.
forget about it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
Thank
We got
you.
just over 5 minutes left, and Carol had another question asking, how could we be more fiscally responsible with general fund tax monies? Yeah.
That's a really good question. So one thing, and that I commend leadership on this, they have really hit home, and as a freshman, in my training, that when we get a bill, we are looking at what those agencies, the program costs. Specific to, so I'll give you an example. We just in Health and Human Services, we're combining 2 programs in a bill, and it had a 0 fiscal note. And when you have a bill that's a 0 fiscal note, usually as a sponsor, you're excited, right? Because there's not any fiscal implications, obviously. But one of our legislators he said, why is it a 0 fiscal note if we're combining programs? And shouldn't we have saved resources here? And someone turned to me and said, you are going to be lucky if you ever get an agency to cough up money on something like that. Because he was right. We're combining departments, we're consolidating. We should have seen some revenue back to the state, right? And so I think we have to be much more, I hate using the word critical, but really keeping a close eye on those tax dollars and how they're operating at agency levels and the programs there. That's why I'm curious, when someone starts a program without a sunset provision, that means it is a eternal program. It is so hard to end a program once it's started. And so one thing you can do is, okay, let's insert a sunset provision and actually have a study to see how effective this is. You could be doing more in-depth digging on it. I would say this too, though, as a legislator, I've found, the prep leading up for the session is year long. And as someone who got in, you're reading bills and you're, grappling with the budget. And I think we can do a better job, though, at being efficient with our state agencies. And I think some do it better than others, and having more transparency for those dollars that are spent. So one thing we do, just like I think a lot of people have probably worked for nonprofits or been a part of it, where they'll say, and if you're in the military ever, you would know this, at the end of the year, they'd say, crap, we have $100,000. We have to spend now. If we don't get it allocated again next year. And so they'll just, well, I guess everyone needs a new laptop and new furniture. And, we throw this all in. I think we need to find a way to actually incentivize savings so that if you can come back to us as a committee and say, look, we actually saved X amount of dollars, that you're not penalized for it. Bless you, George. So
Can I jump in on this?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marcy.
This is Lindsay. I just had
Lindsay, sorry, Lindsay.
You're fine. So one thought that I've had in terms of helping those agencies be able to save that money is if they could earmark money for the next year. I have worked with like teachers or other people who they have a certain amount of money allocated to them. It's not enough to replace the copier. It's not enough to buy like some standard of testing that they want. But if they could set aside some money from this year that was seen as quote unquote extra, and earmark it for that purchase for the next year, that would allow them to use their money more efficiently. And because the money appears to be used, they wouldn't be under threat of having their budget be affected, right? They wouldn't be viewed.
Solution to that as well, because you're giving them more autonomy in some sense by allowing them to operate like a business where you would save money and roll it over, right, into the next quarter. That's really interesting. That's something I'll look into, just looking at how, because right now it is use it or lose it for a lot of people, for a lot of programs.
George, you're muted.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Sorry, I was saying, I know that we've told you that we're only going to take you till 2, so it's almost that time. If there's any final thoughts.
Question, yeah.
Okay. So is there a final question that somebody wants to end this with? Just kind of rolling through everything, make sure I didn't miss anything, and I don't think I did.
Well, I want to just say too that I love that someone said, I agree, leave the flag alone. That's awesome. I just want to say thank you for being engaged in the process. And I have heard from my colleagues who, so obviously I voted no on the tax bill, but I've heard from some colleagues, they've said, I wish people would have reached out to me. And I think, I appreciate how engaged our community is, but I would just say thank you for engaging in the legislative process. That's what makes this work. And I try to be incredibly accessible. So my cell phone is online, so shoot me a text. George, Facebook message works great too, as you've seen. I really try and get back with people. And if you ever want to come up to the Hill and sit next to me during floor time and hear a debate, you're welcome to. I've had a couple constituents take me up on that. For me, I have a special interest, obviously, in getting our youth engaged. I did an internship at the Capitol in high school, and that was life-changing for me. So if you have kids or teenagers who want to come up and sit on the House floor, they're invited to as well. Just shoot me a text beforehand, and I can get it set up.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time. Hey, would you do us a favor and maybe let your colleagues know that we really are, if we didn't start that way, we really are trying to get as informed on the tax details as we can, and I think we're getting there, because we'd like to end the message that we are uninformed constituents on these subjects. So
I would just like to, to that point though, I think that just because you disagree doesn't mean you're uninformed on something, and I would say we have to do better about agreeing to disagree on things. But so yeah, no, and I was contacted by several constituents. I just think some areas, and I've known this Harriman area is very engaged and active as a community, but not all districts are as active as ours.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be posting this, and I'll send you a link so you can share it as well with whoever you want to share it with. Okay.
Thanks, I appreciate that. You guys are great. Look forward to doing this again.
All right. Thanks, here. Bye-bye.
Thank you.